The gospel reading for this morning is Luke 17, verses 11 through 19, and it's the story of Jesus healing the 10 men with leprosy. And this is from the New International Version. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And they went, and as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well."
Well, if I look particularly emaciated, it's because Belinda's been in Puerto Rico the last 10 days. Yeah, right. Don't I wish? Anyway, but we welcome her back, and so maybe in the coffee break time, you want to ask her any questions about Puerto Rico, and she may read that answer. But anyway, we had a good time, and I'm glad that she's back for this brief moment. Also, I had the opportunity to hang out with the past pastors. Pam Everhart was at the clergy orders event that I was at this week, and Todd was also with her. So that was good to catch up and hear what they're up to. They now live in Florida, just to let you know, and Todd is serving there at one of the VA hospitals, and then Pam has a church there in the Orlando area, if I remember right. So that was just good to catch up with them, and they send you all greetings. Some of you got to see them maybe before they went up to the event in Estes Park, but again, you didn't. They just want to say hi. Well, I bet you that some of us have been getting the same mail over the last few weeks. For instance, we got one of these yet? There you go. All right. That's from the state of Colorado. And depending where you live, if you're in Boulder County, you may have received one of these. Right? If you're in Longmont, you might have received one of these. Okay. So we all know an election is coming up. And then, this is just one example, don't take it for whatever. Then we're getting different positions, on some of these. These are the ones that are sort of like telling you what's going on, what's on the ballot, but then they're the ones that tell you how to vote on the ballot, right? And we're getting a lot of those. And then, we also then get a mailing like this, which, oh, wait a minute. This says, Fright-tacular haunted houses. There's a list of those. So the reality is that for some of us, this may be as scary as this over here. What we're getting into. Yeah, right. So we get a lot of these mails, and you know what? It's time again. It kind of reminds us of the diversity of our opinions about things and the potential polarization that continues to occur because of our positions. And it's important for us to be passionate about what we believe. So I'm not here to tell you how to vote, or I'm not here to tell you about anything like that. I'm just here to acknowledge the reality that we don't always agree about things, and we wrestle continually to understand what would be the best choice. Because as we're well aware, some of these different proposals, the legislative pieces, whatever, they have either a yes or a no. We either agree or we don't agree, and that's part of our rights as a citizen to make that choice. But we all recognize that within any choice we make, there'll be consequences. And of course, our understanding of what the consequences are is that diversity of our opinion. If we don't get this, then this may result. And that's why we make our choices. So we recognize that in our society, at this moment, but I really shouldn't even use that term. Why should I say at this moment? Like it's anything different? The reality is there's a whole lot of polarization going on. And so that kind of sets the context for this particular verse that we're hearing about today. The reality is, back around 700 BC, there was a whole lot of polarization going on, especially when it came to the practice of the Jewish faith. You see, the folks had just returned from exile. When they had been taken off to Babylonia, then Assyria, and then Cyrus had decided, well, okay, children of Israel, you can go back home. And so they came back home and they began to reestablish themselves in this territory that had been theirs. Now, if you had any chance to ever kind of study the biblical maps, and in a way, I'm sorry I don't have them to show you up there in front of you, but if you could just take it for what it's worth, if you look at Israel, you've got kind of this little land strip here. If you look up above, you sort of have this area that would be in the northern territories. Like sometimes you've heard the words Tyre, Sidon up there, or maybe you've heard about, now I can't remember the name of the mountain all of a sudden, but Caesarea anyway is up there. And so that's in the northern territory. If you want to kind of know what they're talking about, that would be like Lebanon, Syria today. You're right there in the Syrian border. Here we go. When you're at Mount Hermon, sorry, just forgot that for a second. When you're at Mount Hermon, you just go a little bit over to, I think, the west of it. You can actually look across this valley between the Israeli and the Syrian border. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Well, anyway, so a number of the folks, they first started there because it was kind of this land bridge. So if you're thinking about Assyrian Babylonia, well, you're basically, talking about Iran, Iraq, you're talking about that whole area over there. So there was this Fertile Crescent land bridge that came across, and the people would have had to come down through that territory to move back down to eventually what becomes the center of the faith, Jerusalem. Right? But before that, you may or may not be aware, there were some other places that were identified to be the holy places. The places where the sacrifices to God should be made. One of those places was called Shechem. And it was interesting, it was between two different mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Edla. And what was fascinating about that, the Shechem was actually in the valley between these two mountains. And part of the tribes of Israel were to go up on the one mountain, Mount Gerizim, and up there they were going to shout praises. And then the other ones would go to this other mountain, Mount Ebla, and they were supposed to shout curses. Right? So we have the praises and the curses going on up here. And then the priests were down in the middle. The Levites were down in the middle, trying to make it all okay. So even the religious practice, if you look that up, this is in the Bible, you can see even the religious practice realized they had to have the polarity. It wasn't that bad. We need to have praise over this side, but we also need to have the curses, because they all kind of work together. Because sometimes you don't want to get so happy about things that you forget about what's not so good. Right? So that was kind of one of the fun things about the relationship that people had with God. You could either thank God, or you could hold God accountable. You notice that, but a lot of times in Judaism, you let God know if God's not performing right. What's going on here, God? That kind of thing. But at the other side, you want to make sure that you're saying thank you, as Katie was pointing out so well today. So you had this sort of polarity happening anyway. And then, add to this, well, not everybody went off into exile. There was some folks that for some reason were able to stay. And so they kind of lived, if you're kind of coming down the territory, they lived up in the mountains there. Now, what you have to know about the trade routes, and I'm trying to show you Israel, I just need the map, I'm sorry. But, the only way to get from up there down to the southern area is either along the King's Road, remember from Damascus, you would come down, and that would be out there by what's now Jordan, kind of like along the Transjordan Valley. So you've got, the Sea of Galilee, you're walking down there, and you would end up, down around where the Dead Sea is. Okay, so you have that trade route. That's where a lot of the trade went from Egypt up then to Damascus, Syria, all of that. There was a whole lot of different products that Egypt had, and they ran it up and down. You also have to remember these trade routes is where, there were these 9 big, huge wars, and that's where Armageddon is to take place, because it's this major thing between the cultures of the north and the cultures of the south, in Africa, Egypt. And supposedly it's all going to come to fruition someday in the middle of that. But you also then have the sea route. So that's this route that would come down and go through Tiberias and head down through Jerusalem. But along the way, and this is even true today, again, this mountain area, there's a group of people called the Samaritans that lived there. They're right below the Galileans, who, if you remember, Jesus was from Nazareth. So he was a Galilean. Well, heck, the Galileans were their own folks too. I mean, they talked their own language. They had their own culture. In fact, they had really good agriculture. So again, if I was playing with the front range kind of motif, maybe you've got your Fort Colonites or your Greelyites over here. I remember the first time I moved to Boulder, the people in Boulder used to say, yeah, it's going to snow. I say, how do you know it's going to snow? I can smell Greeley. So at first I thought that was a put down. Later on, you came to discover that was really true. It meant there was an upslope, right? That was coming. But there's sort of that distinction. And as I served as this district superintendent, wow, it was amazing how the churches that I was overseeing were really different on the west side of I-25 versus the east side of I-25, and then along 287 versus 85, and then of course you went out the freeway 76 there, and so the more you went out that way, then everything just continues to change. And I could make really good jokes about people from Boulder when I was in Haxton, and vice versa. Well, so just different cultures, different worlds, different languages, different values. I shouldn't even say it, but I remember one time I was in Holyoke, and there was an Obama sign. I said, where'd that come from? And I'm not putting Obama down. I'm just saying it was just, that difference, but it'd be the same way around. And I don't say anymore, but who might not be in Boulder. But you know what I'm saying? And all of this can bring about polarization, the splitting of cultures. And so you see what happened then was, when these folks came back from Israel, they decided, based on things that happened in the Bible and the beliefs that they had, that the real new place of the temple should be on Mount Moriah, now Mount Gerizim. And so they began to establish this place, this holy place, where the relationship with God on behalf of the Jewish people would take place in this place called Jerusalem. Which, of course, the root of the word Jerusalem is Salem, which means place of peace, right? So Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, then becomes the center of the Jewish culture. But the Samaritans, they were sitting up on what they had thought and what they believed from time immemorial was that place where the holy mountain really was, where the sacrifices should take place. And in fact, it isn't until just recently that those sacrifices have taken place. I remember when I traveled through this territory, we didn't go through Samaria. We either went down, like I said, kind of the east side of the mountains, or we went down, the west side of the mountains. We never went right through the Samaritan territories. And the first time I went, I was with a Jewish guy. The second time I was with a Palestinian guy. But either one just said, yeah, that's where the Samaritans live. So some of this is still going on. It's not like this is contemporary, or like really ancient, it's something that's happening right now. So there was some pretty bad blood, that's what I'm trying to say. And so even at 700 BC, these guys were fighting it out. And a couple things happened around, about that time. There was this guy named Elishabed, and he was one of the priests of the Samaritans. Or excuse me, no, he was a Jewish priest, a Levite, the Levitic priest. And he marries the daughter of Sanballat, the governor of that area, right? But she was a non-Jew, so Nehemiah kicks him out of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. So Sanballat builds him a temple on Mount Gerizim, the site that the Samaritans believed where the true temple should be built. And then in 108 BC, during the Maccabean War, the Samaritan temple was destroyed. And then around Jesus' time, a bunch of Samaritans went down to the temple in Jerusalem and desecrated the temple by scattering a bunch of human bones throughout the temple. So, I just want you to hear all that so that you can remember it. Anytime you hear the word Samaritan, when Jesus, there's a couple different stories, this is just one of them. When Jesus points out, and this one was a Samaritan, you just have to remember there was some real history behind this. But they were both of the same faith. The children of Israel, the house of Israel and Judah. But there was some bad blood between them. So, there are 10 lepers. Those that had this disease. And in that culture, they would be considered to be unclean. Therefore, they would stand outside the ability to be a part of the rituals of the faith. Not being able to participate in the rituals of the faith would almost mean you were less than fully human. You really didn't have the opportunity to participate in the blessings of God. You were an outcast. You were separated. Now we know with leprosy there would be a good hygienic reason for that. It's a very contagious disease, and we all know of the leper colonies that have existed throughout history. But at the same time, it was as much symbolic as it was actual. They would have been excluded. And so, when they call out to Jesus, he just happened to be going along between Galilee and Samaria, which means he had to take a detour because he was on his way to Jerusalem. So instead of doing those two routes that I told you about, for some reason he was going through those mountains. Don't always know what Jesus was thinking, but there seems to be another message, right? Whenever we read something like that, it's sort of like, oops, take notice, something's going to happen here. And so he's going through, and there's this village that has these 10 lepers. Well, even the number 10 is sort of fascinating, because if you looked at the number of tribes that would have been up in the northern territory, when an exile would have happened, there would have been 10 of them. So, I'm not sure if there's something there. Instead of the 12, there's the 10. But anyway, they cry out to Jesus. They say, have mercy on us. Well, that could have meant a lot of different things. Having mercy may have meant, just like the folks that stand in some of our street corners. Could you spare a dime? Could you share some food? Part of our homeless population, they have a need. And maybe that's all they were asking of Jesus. Could you just have mercy on us? We know you seem to be a learned man. There are many followers of you. We just have a sense that you are somebody that can help us. And then what does Jesus say to him? He says, sure. He says, here's the deal. Go show the priest. Go show the priest what you have. And so they say, okay. So as they are headed then to the temple, what happens? Well, all 10 of them are healed. They are cleansed. And of course, there's this distinction here to be made between the healing and the cleansing. So in some ways, they're being cleansed of anything that put them outside of the faith, of the ritual of the faith, right? While at the same time, they're being healed physically. Now the deal is, in a way, the priests served as the health department in those days. So they would have such strict codes that really sort of predetermined, what health looked like. And that's a lot of their laws were around health codes, right? So, in a way, the priests were going to validate that they were truly healed and now safe to be a part of the community. That was just like a temporal function that they performed. While at the same time, then they would have, in a sense, okayed them to be a part of the ritual, to be a part of the faith, to be one who would be in a right relationship with God. But, out of those 10, and it's not clear if we can say that, well, they forgot who was the one that really brought them the healing. I mean, they were a part of this group. I mean, their minds were set. They didn't know any better, so they were just saying, hey, yeah, let's go tell the priest, this is really cool. But among the one, there was one who saw things a bit differently for some reason. And he turns around. And what does he do? Well, he heads back to Jesus. And he falls, before Jesus on his feet, giving glory to God. And Jesus looks at him and says, were there not 10 that were healed? Why is it that this foreigner, Jesus seems to want to emphasize again, this one that seems to be different from all the others, the one who's been rejected, has been called a renegade, that these people who are the original practitioners also of this faith, who are no longer included, why is it that the Samaritan was the only one who came back to give thanks to God? Well, it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition, isn't it? And again, it's one of those kind of things where you really can't say the others were wrong. Hey, they just got healed. This is cool. They get to go show somebody. They can become part of the community once again. But Jesus so often uses the other to try to point to something, to try to remind us of a deeper message, of a deeper sense of values. So some would at least say of this Samaritan, he was the one who woke up. He now had the ability to see not only the right rituals of God, but he came to see the one who was going to bring the true healing from God. A new way of understanding life, a way of transformation. He recognized that Jesus was the one sent from God. And so he returns to say thank you to Jesus, but not just to Jesus, but to God who has finally sent the Messiah, the one who will bring true redemption, healing to the world. Some would say he became enlightened. He's not just healed physically, but a deeper healing of his very being is taking place. And this healing is a gift from God. So like I said, some say seeing is truly an act of faith. Learning to see is the key. The goal to see for you is to see who you are. The Talmud reads, "We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are." Or Robert Barron wrote, "Christianity is above all a way of seeing. Everything else in Christian life flows from circles around the transformation of vision. Christians see differently, and that is why their prayers, their worship, their actions, their whole way of being in this world has a distinctive flavor." A Rabbi, Harold Kushner, wrote in his book, Who Needs God? Religion is not primarily a set of beliefs, a collection of prayers, or a series of rituals. Religion is first and foremost a way of seeing. I can't change the facts about the world we live in, but I can change the way we see those facts, and that in itself makes a difference. So God acts. We respond in gratitude. And we recognize that the transformation takes place in each one of us. That's the gift of Jesus. Gift in a way, Jesus in a way is shifting what's called the mercy seat. If you remember anything about the tabernacles, the tents that were the original places that the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, was, and if you remember anything about, there's the two angels, right? The cherubim that are sitting on the Ark of the Covenant, and in between the two is this little space, and who sits on that little space right there? That's where God sits. Right? That was the way it was thought. Wherever that Ark of the Covenant was, that's where God was in relationship with the people. That's called the mercy seat. Okay? So this is this battle where the mercy seat is. Gerizim, or is it in the Holy of Holies down in Jerusalem? Well, that's where it's at now, at this moment. Right? But Jesus is offering a different thought about this. Jesus is moving that mercy seat from that one spot that can be fought over to a place that's taken with us, that's truly portable. And that's right here in our hearts. Jesus is moving the mercy seat. And that's what the Samaritan is trying to reveal to us. That the glory of God will be able to be experienced by each of us. Not just in the Holy of Holies in the temple, where only the high priest can go in anyway, right? And everybody else stands outside saying, wow, this would be pretty cool. And the Holy, remember the high priest comes out once a year, which we're going to hear at the beginning of Advent, right? Zechariah is going to come out, and, well, then of course Zechariah can't speak when he comes out, but anyway, that's another story, right? That's down the road. But now you know where that's coming from. But the whole gospel narrative, and what Luke's trying to point us to, is that this transformation that we're all seeking and wishing for is going to happen here. We then become these ones who bear God, the Theotokos, the God bearers. And it is each of us that bring glory to God. And so that's why, Katie, right on, one of the first acts of anyone that recognizes that glory is the act of gratitude. That's one of the most holy acts we can be involved in. It's one of the practices. The saying thank you to God. So that's why we say thank you to God when we join together in meals. That's why we say thank you when we join here for worship. You know, it's interesting, if you look at the etymology of the word worship, it reminds us of our dog friends. The actual word there in the Greek means to literally lick the hand of. Right? And our little dog friends are always like, hi, claiming us for themselves, right? I think, well, that's kind of weird. Lick the hand of worship? What's that all about? Well, sort of like, they used to put out the rain, right? The emperors, or even the pope, or whatever. And I'm not saying it's bad, it's just there's an act, though, of respect. Right? Worship. We honor you. But there may be another word that Jesus is adding to this, and that would be the word devotion. So it's not just like I'm apart from you, so I respect you for who you are and your power, but it's also I'm devoted to you. In a sense, there's a deeper relationship with the word devotion. It means I care for you, you care for me. It's a part of that covenant, right? The covenant that Jesus has come, in a sense, to fulfill. God made the promise. Jesus is showing them that the promise is being fulfilled. And so what do? We say, thank you. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for loving those of us who sometimes maybe are the renegades, the outcasts, the ones that don't know the rituals, the ones that are in the wrong place. Or thank you for some of us that we're over there shouting all the praises all the time, but we're not completely sure what we're praising. We're always trying to figure out, is this the right thing to be praising? I don't know if you saw that Pew study, it just came out recently. It's talking about how religion is just disappearing in America. There's about 50% of us that may have been practicing any kind of faith, just 10 years ago. It's only like 40% now. And it's getting less and less when it comes to people like us, Protestants, even evangelical churches. While there may be a few growing some places, overall, it's beginning to wane. But at the same time, we have to recognize that no matter what, we have been called to be the ones who help try to bring about the transformation. Maybe we are the ones that have to stand in the valley between the blessings and the cursors to try to figure out some way that we recognize that this is of God. God working in us. Because isn't it interesting, the very last thing that Jesus says to the Samaritan? He says, go. Your faith has made you well. And I've been talking about this living the life of faith, and it begins with God's faith in us, and then it's our response back to God because of God's faith in us. And I think that's a major moment right there when Jesus makes that pronouncement. It's like Jesus spends all this time trying to train all these people and all these new rituals and ways of thinking and whatever, but every once in a while there's somebody that gets it. Right? The woman at the well. You can probably think of the times when Jesus said, go, your faith has made you well. Oh, what's that about? But I think what that's about is that realization, even in the Samaritan, that all these things that have been divisive, all these reasons they had fought over hundreds and thousands of years, all these places that they had battled over as the right place to worship God in the right way, all of a sudden he saw in Jesus a whole other way. He saw what, of course, Jesus called the way. And in that way, this one who had leprosy, this one who was an outcast, found liberation. As Jesus said in the Gospel of Luke, I came to give sight to the blind, to make the lame be able to walk, to release the captives. And you can see in this act, in this moment, he's set free. Now, I don't know what you think about Amazon. Not the river. Glenda's been up that, though. Yeah, so you can talk about that too. But I mean the corporation, yes. Okay, so I'm not talking about good or bad about Amazon, but it was the leadership principle that I was reading about in the New Yorker. That's the most recent issue. And here's the deal. It was talking about Jeff Bezos, and the article's entitled The Unstoppable Machine. So I'm going to listen to that. But here's the deal. The writer, Charles Duhigg, was talking about how most firms have a mission statement that even the CEO has trouble remembering. Right? How many can quote the mission statement here? And it's actually a pretty good one, right? Embrace the community, transform the world. That's kind of our way that we say it. Okay? But here's what he discovered. As they were doing research, this guy named Ian Fried, he went on to create all sorts of kind of interesting things. He kept studying the leadership principles. How do things work? And so when he was talking to Jeff Bezos himself, Bezos said this: if you have a really good idea, stick to it. But be flexible about how you get there. Be stubborn in your vision, but flexible on the details. Executives at other companies tended to lay out definitive plans. But Bezos urged his people to be adaptable. People who are right a lot change their minds, he once said. They have the same data sets that they had at the beginning, but they wake up and they reanalyze things all the time, and they come to a new conclusion, and then they change their minds. Do you think that's what Jesus was saying then to the Samaritan? The goal is the redemption of humanity. The goal is to restore, the garden. The goal is to bring salvation, like our first hymn, to be saved. That's what the goal is. And in Jesus Christ, that can happen. But how is that going to happen? It may not be Jesus waving the magic wand, or you finding the right place to do it in the right way, to believe it in the right way, No. There's something about Jesus reaching into each and every one of our souls to say, if you want to be a follower of the way, then what choices are you going to make? Because there's going to be a lot of choices. And there are consequences to your choices. There are great polarities that divide us. But what did I teach? What are my statutes? What are my principles? What does it mean to love one another as you love yourself? What does it mean to reach out to your neighbors? What does it mean to reach out to the least, the last, and the lost? What does that mean to you? Goal is the same, but what do we need to learn and see in order to reach the goal? So Ian Fried often felt an impulse to answer his own subordinates' questions when he was leading. But at Amazon, leaders are encouraged to let the team members puzzle out problems on their own. And so that's where we are as practicing Christians today. We really don't have one big temple to fight over or to go to, or, we've had some people build ones that look like them, right? But we're a rather split up, diverse kind of group of folks, all trying to follow Christ. That's why we, each of us, have to continue to wrestle with what does it mean to be one who glorifies God and truly finds salvation and healing through the power of Jesus Christ in our own lives. There's a prayer that comes from the small catechism of the Lutheran Church, and I'll end with that. So maybe this might be the prayer you would pray, or something like this, as we say thank you to God and as we turn our lives over to Christ. I believe that God has created me and all that exists. God has given me and still preserves my body and soul with all their powers. God provides me with food and clothing, home and family, daily work, and all I need from day to day. God also protects me in time of danger and guards me from every evil. All this God does out of caring and divine goodness and mercy, though I do not deserve it. Therefore, I surely ought to thank and praise, serve and obey God. This is most certainly true. So the choice is up to you. They're yours to make. But what values will guide those choices? Your faith has made you well. I hope that you'll be one of those who says thank you.